Well, James Stirling joins me again on Bay Radio this week to continue our discussions on whether Spain or the UK offers the best value for your retirement years. How are you doing, James?
I'm very well, thanks, Howard. How are you?
I'm very well. We previously discovered visa costs, property, healthcare, and the cost of living. If you missed it, you'll find a recording of the podcast page at blevinsfranks.com. This week, though, we focus on taxation. Of course, income tax affects us all, whether we receive employment income or retirement pension. How do rates and allowances compare between the UK and Spain?
It's really interesting. I think there's a large misconception that Spain is actually a very, very high tax country. Now, on the face of it, it can be. So when we're looking at income tax to begin with, all regions in Spain have slightly different tax rates. So when we're looking at general income tax, it typically runs from 19 to 47%. What we do have in Madrid, though, is we have a lower starting point at 18%, and in areas such as Valencia, the rates can be as high as 54%. But for most clients, in most regions, you'll sit in 19 to 47%. Now, in the UK, everyone will have the first meeting, they'll sit down and go, do you have a personal allowance in Spain? Well, the answer is we have something similar, but in terms of a calculation, it's quite different. But to draw a comparison, there's about a €6,000 allowance, which is obviously much less than we have in the UK of around 12,500. Now, when we're drawing direct comparisons, obviously the bands are different, it's quite tough. But as a general rule of thumb, at the lower end of income, yes, you're going to pay slightly more tax in Spain. But what I often caveat that with is, if you seek advice and you're able to restructure your income, then you can get it to a position which is fairly similar. As your income increases for clients, then yes, you go up the bands, but the further you increase your income, the closer income tax becomes between the two countries.
What about investment income, like bank interest, dividends, and capital gains?
Well, I think listeners will be pleased to know that actually the regions are the same for this. So at the bottom end, for €6,000, the rates start at 19%, and they progress up to 30%, which is above €300,000. Again, what's really important is the structure of this. What's quite different when comparing the Spanish to the UK system is that essentially we have general income, which we spoke about in the previous question, and then you have savings income. And structuring the right investment income or rental income or employment income in a way that makes it as efficient as possible can be really, really key and reduce your tax bill. So seek advice either prior to a move, or even if you happen to be in country, it's worth just having a meeting, discussing what you can and can't do. And if you can restructure things properly, it could be a very lucrative saving.
Spain imposes a wealth tax while the UK doesn't. But are many people affected by it?
Really good question. And I would say this is the big fear for clients when they first come to speak to us as a firm, wealth tax. So, well, the simple answer is it doesn't affect many people, but it depends very highly on the region. If you're in some of the regions, the Balearic Islands, Valencia, Madrid, then the allowance is typically around €4 million per person. What I always say to clients when they're looking at a move to Spain, if you're indifferent on region, then looking at your overall circumstances and your assets, and then making a decision on, okay, we know what our position is in the UK perspective, we know all the things we need to do to come to Spain, but what does our assets actually look like in Spain, and what is the taxation? Because what will be very clear from that is there a specific region that is going to be very helpful for you in terms of taxation, or is going to be very prohibitive? And as we said earlier, Valencia can be quite prohibitive. Balearic Islands, Madrid and Andalusia are much more generous when it comes to wealth tax. So seeking advice, understanding it can be critical. The other part I will say on wealth tax is it's often misunderstood. So people think it's your assets are all added up and there's a flat rate of tax. And part of that's true. But the second part of the calculation involves what your income is in any given year. And it can't be less than 20% and more than 60%. So there are two things you can look to do in terms of planning for wealth tax. One is you can reduce your assets, but also in terms of looking to change the income slightly to then mitigate what the tax bill will be. And this is the process that we go through for lots of our clients to ensure that they are as efficient as possible when it comes to taxation here in Spain.
And looking into the future, hopefully far into the future, will your heirs be better off if you died as a Spanish or UK resident? And how do the inheritance taxes compare?
So I think this is a very useful question because I think this is very misunderstood by lots of clients that are looking to come to Spain. So what are the rules and legislation at the minute? Well, what we have now is complete clarity on when do you fall out of the UK's inheritance tax rules. And prior to the budget, well, not the last budget, but the previous budget, Rachel Reeves was very clear on that. So once you have been out of the UK for 10 out of 20 of the previous tax years, then you fall outside the scope of UK inheritance tax on your worldwide assets. Why is this important? Well, all regions in Spain have slightly different rules, but there are some regions in Spain that actually have very helpful succession tax rules. And that means you can pass assets, as long as it's to direct descendants, very efficiently from yourself to your heirs, and there can be very little or no inheritance tax in many situations. If we compare that to the UK, what do we know from 2027? Well, pensions, which are typically a fairly large asset for most clients, they will be included in UK inheritance tax rules, and if you're a married couple, there's a 650,000 allowance, and there's also an extra 175,000 each if you pass your main property to your children. So in very simplistic terms, there's £1 million allowance before you start paying tax of 40%. If you draw a direct comparison between the UK and Spain and you're passing assets to direct descendants, then you will typically find that Spain is a much, much better place to base yourself and to pass assets to the next generation. How would I caveat that? It will be different for all clients. It will be different on the region. And I would recommend everyone seek advice if this is what you're looking to do.
So do you have any final comments or advice on taxation in Spain?
I think the key thing is don't be put off Spain because of high taxes. Seek advice. If you're indifferent on region, then it's worth looking in detail at your overall asset base, your income, and then deciding on what is the best location for you. Now, I'm not saying that you should make all decisions based on tax. You want to live where you want to live. But for wealthier clients, where particularly when it comes to succession tax or wealth tax, these become an issue, then it's really, really important to have these types of planning exercises done. The other piece of advice I'll leave listeners with, Howard, is the sooner you have these meetings when you're thinking of moving to Spain, the better. Because there's lots of things we can do prior to a move that are quite tax efficient. And if you do it once you're in Spain, then we're very limited in what you can do.
So how can listeners get in touch with Blevins Franks if they have intentions of moving to and living in Spain?
A great place to start would be to head to our website, blevinsfranks.com. There you'll find a host of information and guides which will get you started on understanding if Spain is right for you. There you can also arrange an initial meeting and we can get in touch.